Welcome back to Late Night Lamentations. It's good to see you. I gotta stop. Alright, we'll keep it in. We're not gonna do it's good to see you. I'll think of something else. There's a couple of new things happening, huh? How you been? You been alright? You know, we took out the intro music and we're gonna try this whole new thing with having the custom music at the beginning. I think that sounds pretty cool. I don't know if this beat is too fast for the pacing of it. I don't really have time anymore to make another one. But I don't know, I think it's kind of cool. What do you think? What are we
talking about?
Late Night Lamentations. Does God Feel Pain? Episode 2. The Cycle. Judges chapter 10, verse 16. And they put away the strange gods from among them, and served the Lord, and his soul was grieved for the misery of Israel. Where do we even start? Where do we even begin? So much has happened between the Genesis verse last week, if you remember, and this one here, that it feels like I can't really express the significance of this verse in Judges without giving you like 30 pages of context, or like really 300 or more pages of context. And you know, this is why it's so important, and I'm gonna keep saying it. I probably say it, I think 2 or 3 times in this video alone. I'm gonna keep saying it. It's so important for you at home to do some of the legwork yourself and to read, like take some of the time, and in your own time, to go read what's in there. Like what I'm going to cover here just isn't enough, but you know, we're here. I'm gonna try anyway, and let's go see what happens. Let's go. Let's get it. Go. This is a huge jump. There is so much that goes on in Exodus alone that's worth reading through. Though, you know, books like Leviticus and Numbers can be difficult to understand at times. But for our purposes here, I want to give you some key events that serve as introductory exposition that you'll need to know before getting too deep into what the verse in Judges is actually referring to. God has made a promise with a man named Abraham back in Genesis 12. Right at the beginning of the chapter it says, "Now the Lord had said unto Abram," I know his name is Abraham, it was Abram, it's been changed to Abraham, there's a whole reason for that, they mean 2 different things, it's very symbolic, it's very cool, we don't have time, but it's the same guy, okay, it's the same guy. Anyway, 12:1. Match point. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, "Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." There's like a whole other thing here about how cool is it that Abraham had, like, his story. Don't have time, but it's very special. That line about how he takes him out of his country and from his kindred. It's like, it's very, there's a whole episode there. But let's focus on God's promise. The promise itself is broken down like this, right? "I will make you a great nation. I will show you a new land that will be all your own. In this new land, you will be blessed. Those who oppose you will be cursed, and all families of the earth will be blessed by your example." The remainder of Genesis follows that first leg of the promises that were just mentioned, or the promise that was just mentioned, by way of focusing on Abraham's lineage. We don't have time, and so we won't go or get into how his sons and his sons' sons... Thanks, Caio. We won't get into how his sons and his sons' sons fit into all of this, but if you've heard of the names of like Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, Genesis is all about them. And they're all really good stories. Like, even if you aren't... am I going to do it between every transition? I might. I just might. Anyway, flip. When we get into Exodus, we find that Abraham's family, now called Israel, is in fact a nation. However, they've found themselves enslaved to the Egyptians. The first half of this book covers events that you're probably familiar with, be that of the 10 plagues and how a man named Moses struggles to guide the Israelites out of Egypt towards the second part of God's promise, the new land. The second half of Exodus is the start of Israel's journey into the wilderness. This is where you'll see the 10 Commandments come into play, right? And the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle is built. I could go into a lot more here because there's a ton here. I didn't even tell you about how Moses technically killed a guy, and I didn't tell you about the burning bush, and I didn't tell you about bada bing, bada boo. There's so much. But for time's sake, again, we should have a counter for how many times I say the word tangent or for time's sake. Anyway, just try to understand that there's a place called Mount Sinai that is known and revered for a reason, multiple reasons, and it's where a lot of what God does for Israel as a young nation takes place. Mount Sinai isn't Egypt. It's not like the same thing. Are you following? Am I following? I don't know. It's an important location, okay? Anyway, when they finished the tabernacle, which, in case you're unaware, which I was too before I really looked into it and read it both in the book and looked up what the tabernacle mean. It's basically a mobile tent-like place of worship. It's kind of like a holy site on wheels, but upon further examination after writing that, it doesn't have wheels. But anyway, Moses tries to enter this tabernacle and finds out that he and the entire nation at this point are denied access. Can't go in. And this is because God is set apart or holy. And if he's going to put his presence into an earthly environment, it does not allow anything near it that doesn't even faintly resemble that specific type of holiness. So that's actually where we pick up in Leviticus with this question of, okay,
how do we become holy?
The first half of Leviticus goes into great details about how all of this is supposed to work. Now, lots of people will read through this book and get lost in the sea of directions that are given to Israel specifically because they want to commune with God. It's important to make the distinction that this book is not about God making things hard for no reason. This is about God responding to Israel's desire to be more like him. If you want to follow God and be like God at this time in Israel's history, here's what you need to do. But this isn't just about that either. There are passages throughout this book, specifically the first half, that provide guidance and education regarding general well-being, tools that Israel can use, not only to grow closer to God, but to do more than just survive in the desert as a nation without a traditional society. If you think about it, they're kind of just like traveling nomads at this point in their history. But, tangent. I'm sure tangent. No, that's like a supporting tangent, bro. For example, there are passages that discuss what you're supposed to do if someone has an issue with blood, what you're supposed to do if someone in your camp has leprosy and doesn't want to spread it to others. And there's stuff in here about what to do when you come into contact with a dead carcass, be that of animals or of actual people, to prevent spreading disease. Leviticus 17 specifically talks about why blood itself is important. Up until now, Israel has been sacrificing animals to God as a way of atonement and hasn't really understood why that is. Remember when I mentioned in the last episode that Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's wasn't? Well, here's where we actually get some answers as to why that is. And again, I want to be super analytical and particular here. I want to dig in there. But again, to save some time, I said it again. Look at Leviticus 17 verses 10 through 11, where it'll give you the gist of why blood is sacred to God. And whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eateth any manner of blood, I will even set my face against that soul that eateth blood, and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. This is huge. These verses alone set the stage for why the law itself was never meant to save man from their sins. It defines blood as life reserves blood for sacred use, and explains that atonement is a life-for-life exchange and not punishment for punishment. Which is, okay, I don't know, just clicked for me that, that last leg of it is what differentiates them from spoilers. It'll make sense. A few final notes for Leviticus before we step away for a bit, but don't you worry yet. We'll be right back. If you read the book carefully, and you'll probably have to do so more than once if you're anything like myself, you'll begin to notice that life and not death is what God holds to be sacred. Death is portrayed and described as serious, heavy, and contaminating. So when we get into later books in this same episode, and you start seeing a bunch of war and bloodshed, I don't think that the Bible is contradicting itself, but rather that it's showing what happens when a holy or set apart and just God continues to engage with an unholy and cursed world. Leviticus gives us the lens through which we can understand what God thinks about life and the value he places upon it. The rest of Scripture wrestles with what it costs to preserve it. This book also contains laws on food, markings on the body, and daily habits. And for a lot of people, that's also where the Bible feels outdated or contradictory. Try to remember what we've discussed earlier, right? This is God's answer to man's question of, how do we be more like you, God? It's not about diet or appearance or status symbols. This is about an identity. These laws in Leviticus set the Israelites apart from their own neighbors just as much as they set them apart from themselves in a way. Later in the Bible, this idea doesn't just get abandoned or rewritten for the sake of keeping up with the times. It's actually further developed and fleshed out. It moves from instructions that help shape the outward man into that of the inward, as a way of showcasing that Israel has always had a heart issue when it comes to what separates them from God, not a doing enough to be good enough issue. We could get into how Christ is the only one who can change that heart, but again, tangents. Okay, so now that I've gone into probably way too much detail about Leviticus, and I probably slowed the momentum of the video down a little bit by hinting at the future, but whatever. What are we talking about? What
are we talking about?
I think we left off with Israel being in the wilderness, right? Because Leviticus was all about how to how to be more like God now that it's just him and the nation. Yep, all right, that makes sense. What does Israel do with this information? The answer might surprise you now, but it certainly won't as we continue reading through Scripture. They struggle. The book of Numbers opens with Moses getting a census on the state of the nation. He starts asking things like, how many tribes we got? How many people per tribe? How many firstborns we got? How many Levites, specifically because they're the ones that are going to take care of the priesthood? How many old people we got? How many sick people? How many of us can fight? How many of us can cook? You get the picture. And that was way too long of a list, but you understand. You probably knew what a census was without me Not too long afterwards, Israel is already complaining. Whether it's because their feet hurt, they've gotten too much free food from the infinite buffet at Casa de Cristo, or that the view of what lied ahead was too sharp a resolution for their 8-bit brains, save Joshua and Caleb. The fact remains that the nation has just gotten instructions on how to play their role in God's promise, and they doubt those instructions over and over and over again. Numbers, as the title of this book, like the title itself, is very interesting to me because it feels a bit ironic. It kind of makes it feel like it's going to be an easy read, but this is probably the most wilderness-like description that we'll get out of all the books in the Torah. Maybe even in the entire Old Testament. That being said, there are some real shining moments here in this book where it showcases Moses' true devotion to both God and his people. Time and time again, Israel will grow complacent and want to forget all about God, and it's Moses who steps in to remind them of who God is. time and time again, God will get angered by what Israel continues to do. And it is Moses who appeals to God's promises and nature that he himself has described to man. But by the end, even Moses himself loses his patience and puts his own will over that of what God commands. I read this passage and, I honestly can't even blame him. After everything Moses has put up with, if I were in his shoes, I would have given that rock God said to speak to a good deal more than just a crack at a staff, Shows how much I know. But disobedience is disobedience. And since Israel was in a place of constantly looking to Moses for guidance as their intercessor between them and God, God has to make sure to instill this idea that it doesn't matter what status a person holds, sin is still sin. After Moses does this, he too gets lumped into the generation that is left out of the promised land due to their tainted hearts. Not because there isn't a cure for that, but because the 40 years or so that this has been happening has finally provoked God into drawing a line in the sand. And this is so heartbreaking to read, man. We're not even really 20 minutes into this video, I think, which maybe that's a long time for you, but I don't know. It's maybe it's not a long time for you, maybe it is. By the end of the book of Numbers, at least if I'm strictly, counting pages here, or if I was when I wrote the script, it's like Moses has been along for the ride for 200 or more pages. The weight, there's this weight that begins to build of wondering if Israel is really going to make it to this promised land after all. And it's heavier than ever by the end of Numbers. But it's also why Deuteronomy is such a great book to follow it. Okay, so if we look at the last 4 books, we can safely say that Exodus and Numbers things are happening in real time, over a long period of time, while Leviticus and Deuteronomy are going to be more here's a lot of stuff that happened pretty much around the same time. Deuteronomy takes place right as Israel is about to go into the Promised Land. By now, Moses is very much, as the Bible loves to say, stricken in years, and won't be around for much longer. This book serves as his last testament to the people that he's cared for over a span of 40 years. We didn't talk about this earlier because, what's that buzzword, ladies and gentlemen? Tangents. But very good. The Bible explicitly states that Moses was 80 years old when he first started leading these people, and he'll be a ripe age of 120 when he finally falls over. You would think that after all this grief, Moses himself would have more than a few unkind things to say to the people he's leaving behind. But he doesn't. Moses' final book isn't some 1-star Yelp review filled with bitterness and anger about the food being too cold or there being flies in his drink. It's a call to remembrance. This book exists here to outline how the first generation failed, the second generation needs to remember what happened, and that memory is the difference between faith and fear. Sometimes we need a reminder of what we've lived through to obtain the strength needed to move forward in where we want to go. Or maybe I need to fill those with eyes. Didn't we talk about this last time, Justin? I don't know. You think I can remember? Anyway, Moses emphasizes what God has already both said and done for his people up until this point. He doesn't add anything new to complicate things. He doesn't reprimand or guilt Israel into being upset. He actually points to something that I too have been saying in the last 2 episodes. If we're counting episode 0 here. Guys, this is all about choice. He asks the Israelites, you remember all the stuff your parents and I have done to get you here? You remember all the stuff we've gone through in this wilderness, all the battles we've taken part in, whether they be physical, mental, or spiritual? You remember your answer to the question of, who is this God you serve? What are you going to do now? And that's the question on everyone's mind. That's the big question, right, on everyone's mind. And Joshua becomes the answer. Ooh, so we've been through a lot, you and I, in this video so far. There's been a lot of things talked about, a lot of knowledge, a lot to digest. I think we need a quick recap without all the details. Try to remember. Exodus is when Israel is enslaved and freed to serve God. Leviticus is a how-to guide on what that really means. Numbers is about how hard that really is. And Deuteronomy is a question of, what are you gonna do about it? I think we may have mentioned the name Joshua like one other time in this video so far, and all you really need to know up until now is that Joshua is one of 2 people out of 12 spies that were initially sent to scout out the land of Canaan who actually had faith in God's plan. Did you follow that? 12 men went to spy on Canaan. Never mind. 10 were bad and 2 were good, okay? And Joshua's one of them. Here's the part in the video where most people in my position would warn you that the next 2 books are very violent. Like, there were some wars and stuff that happened in Numbers, but, I didn't really mention it because you want me to fit everything in. How long do you want the video to be? Don't you shut up. Don't talk to me. You're getting me distracted. The next 2 books are not for the faint of heart, and shouldn't be taken out of the context of time periods in which they were written. But I'm not doing all that, because you should already know all that. And if you don't, I just did it anyway, now that I think about it. Joshua is a crazy turn in Israel's direction, a positive one back to God after such a long time debating on if that was a wise move or not. The book starts off, and maybe the feeling that leads up into this book helps a lot with this, but it starts off with we're feeling a bit hesitant, maybe more than a bit, but we're feeling hesitant about if Joshua can really pick up where Moses left off. But I'm going to save you the drama of too many details, or I'll try to, and tell you that, yes, he absolutely can, and yes, he absolutely does. I'm talking wiping out of nations left and right. I'm talking profound faith in the one that brought him there. Israel has been fighting against themselves for so long that when they finally give control over to God, it's like one of their greatest runs that we ever see in their history. You'll see cities fall to music, you'll see rivers get parted again, but this time by just the Ark of the Covenant itself instead of the staff. You'll see bait and switch tactics where they make it look like there are a few hundred men and they run up this hill like they're retreating, only to turn the tide of battle by running back down the same hill with a few thousand more. Like, this is an epic book, brother. Don't forget your swim trunks and your suntan lotion, okay? Make sure that bottle's got SPF 777 written on the label. I don't know. That's a stupid joke. Victory after victory, multiple so-called kings falling in the wake of the wrath of God through the children of Israel. It's a shame you can't play as Joshua in any of the civilization games, but, it makes sense as, honestly, they'd never have a shot of losing compared to the other empires, but, or so it seems, right? There's an important moment that we can't let all of this sun block our view of the actual situation. All of this winning going around isn't just because Joshua is some incredible leader and that Israel is all of a sudden a perfect nation. It's because they finally put faith behind their creator. We see the cracks of this actually pretty early on in the case of a man named Achan. After Israel defeats a nation by the name of Jericho, and this was the music one I was talking about if you want to go check it out, Achan decides that he doesn't want to listen to God, and he takes some of the forbidden goodies from the city as a personal reward. When he does so, the very next battle at Ai, which it should be noted that Ai in the story is a much smaller nation, or city at this time. This battle with Ai starts off as a loss, and everyone's looking around like, dude, what's going on? What
just happened?
Israel's shocked. Joshua himself is confused, and it's all because the problem didn't lie in a bad strategy, but in a seed of sin. Take a close look at how Israel reacts to this offense, though, within their own kingdom upon discovering the reason behind their loss here. In chapter 7, verses 24 through 26, they not only stone Achan and his family, but they burn them to death as well, and all the aforementioned forbidden goodies. Here we see Israel taking sin seriously, maybe even for the first time. They don't excuse it, they don't minimize it, and they don't ignore the consequences. They see the weeds popping up in the garden, and they rip them out by the root. Joshua is also the point in the Bible where I've seen a lot of people really begin to ask the genuine question of, Big dog, this is a lot of bloodshed. Is God just some warmonger bent on destruction? Or my boss? Not necessarily. As honestly as I can answer this, the Bible does not say that God sends prophets directly to the Canaanites the same way that he'll later say that he sends them to Israel. That kind of warning doesn't come until much later, and in different situations that if we didn't have time for the other stuff I've been saying we don't have time for, we really can't go into that, that specific slice of the pie right there. But we'll get there, okay? I don't want to promise you because I'm not sure where it'll go, but I'm sure we'll get there. The text itself does clearly say that judgment was delayed, corruption accumulated over time, and removal happened after patience, and that nations were not destroyed arbitrarily or suddenly, or just because God didn't like them or something, Anyway, a passage that really sets up the rest of this text in this episode can actually be found in mid-Genesis. Shocker, we have to go back. Specifically, Genesis 15:16, and later with Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18. You'll notice here that judgment is always delayed until the fullness of evil has been revealed in the Genesis 15 verse. But in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, this is a crazy encounter. Can you imagine, I don't know. I couldn't decide if I wanted to say the could you imagine part that I'm thinking in my head before I tell you what happened, as though you already know what happened, but you might not know what happened, so I'm going to tell you what happened. Abraham pleads with God that if even 50 are in this city are righteous, will you spare it? And God answers, yes. If even 50 are good, I will spare the city. And then he continues on, if you read through the verses. All right, God, how about 40? 40's good. All right, how about 30? Yeah, 30's fine. How about 20? Yeah, even 20. He goes all the way down to 10. If even 10 in the city are righteous, God will spare the city. To which God says, again, yes, if even 10, I will spare the city. Sodom and Gomorrah don't even have 10 people out of the entire city that are willing to turn from their wickedness. I don't know how many people are in Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's got to be more than 10. Hey, speculation. It's a city, though, and I don't even know. Is Sodom and Gomorrah one city? Are they two cities that are just buddy-buddy? That's something to look up. I don't really know. I don't know. But anyway, this shows that God gives nations time to change before just taking action. If you look at Exodus chapter 23, you'll see in verses 29 and 30 that God doesn't want everyone gone all at once, since by doing so it would leave the land desolate and uninhabitable for the Israelites when they get there, which would break part of the promise that was mentioned toward the beginning of the episode, if you remember. He says, I will not drive them out from before thee in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field multiply against thee. By little and little I will drive them out from before thee, until thou be increased and inherit the land. Passages in Deuteronomy explicitly deny sudden or arbitrary judgment too. If you look at chapter 9, verses 4 through 5, it talks about how God isn't wiping out nations for the Israelites because the Israelites themselves are great people, alluding to ethnic cleansing. He does it because he made a promise to Abraham, whose righteousness was counted through faith, not conquest, not works, and most definitely and most definitively, get them both in there, not moral superiority. All right, listen, even if that isn't enough for you, because I like what we're doing here, how we're going back and we're making sure everything's cohesive and builds on itself. I like that. But even if you don't even really need to go that far back. I kind of got ahead of myself. If that isn't okay, all right, hold on. Back it up. If that isn't enough for you, and by extension myself when I find future Justin in a similar space of questioning or confusion, because that does happen, shocker, here are some examples of passages where God showcases instructions about restraint in terms of Israel's coming conquest. Israel is not given free rein to do whatever they want. Boundaries are set, nations are spared, and explanations are given. Wow. Put him here. Put him here. I don't know where you're going to find the room. You'll find the room. Put him in there. Here's where I was kind of going off, all right, right here. But even if most of what I just mentioned wasn't there, right, if you didn't go back and study the scriptures to that extent, which is fun to do, but whatever, even if you didn't do it. Look at what Rahab says in Joshua 2:24. Jericho knew what happened in Egypt after the plagues hit. Jericho knew that this God Israel served has put the whooping on probably the most powerful nation at that time. If you consider the fact that if you consider the fact that ancient Egypt was most likely the scariest empire this side of the Nile. If you continue on to Joshua 9, the Gibeonite kingdom is also an example of Canaanite people being well aware of Israel's reputation and mission, even going as far as to making peace with Israel to avoid destruction. Now, in that Gibeonite example, technically the guys are taking advantage of like a loophole. They trick Joshua, but they want peace because they're scared of what the God of Israel can do, which they should be. Like, we didn't go into what the plagues are in this episode, and maybe we'll do it next episode, but we should, because I wanted to do some research about this too, like outside of just scripture. But dude, if you read what happens in those plagues, there's no way people didn't know. Like, okay. Spoilers. Anyway. This final point at the end of Joshua is where we'll take a pause for now. Chapters 23 and 24 are kind of a recap of what just happened in the book, as well as an echo to Moses' last words to Israel in Deuteronomy. Joshua will again tell Israel that this relationship with God is so much more about choosing God over themselves than it ever has been about doing godly things to look pretty in the eyes of men. Joshua will soon pass away, and we'll see if Israel is going to remain faithful to God as they've shown in this book, or if they'll return to trying to do things without him in center view. Let's take another quick detour to address another elephant in the room that I can see out of the corner of my eye, I've seen more than a few times when discussing the Old Testament with those who didn't grow up in an environment where, everyone around you just trusted that God was doing what he had to do because God is God, he's always right, which he is. But by now you might also be asking, what was so bad about these neighboring nations that Israel had to be different from them, or to an extent wipe them out completely? Even though, we could get into a whole discussion about wipe them out completely is kind of hyperbole, and that's given evidence by the fact that they show up later and later in the books. How could they be completely obliterated if they show up? Okay, that's not even an argument I'm trying to make, okay? I don't know, it just slipped out. Dude, sorry. Anyway, great question about what was so bad about these neighbors. Scripture gives us more than a few next-door reviews about these neighbors themselves. Alright, so what do the other books say about the Canaanites? Well, Exodus mostly talks about what God is going to do. Leviticus and Deuteronomy kind of give more details into why he has to do this. When we consider Exodus, God tells Israel three things quite clearly. Number one, he will go before them, guiding and protecting them. Number two, they are not to adopt the gods or practices of what the people already living there currently do. And number three, the removal of these nations will happen gradually, not all at once, to protect Israel's future. We've already talked about a little bit about that last point a second ago, right? Maybe like 10 minutes ago. For specific passages in your book that detail what I just mentioned, you can check out Exodus 23 and 34 if you're curious. But it's in there. It's in there. We'll move on to Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 18 outlines forbidden sexual practices tied to the social and religious customs of both Egypt and Canaan itself. These behaviors are directly tied to the surrounding nations Israel was going to be tempted to adopt, but were instructed to avoid if they were going to remain distinct, which again is something both they and God wanted. Continue on into the book, and you'll find warnings to avoid people who practice wizardry and witchcraft, claiming to have connections to give offerings to things that are not God himself, whether they be familiar spirits or idols of any kind. Something very common among Canaanite religions at this time. See the references here on the screen. And the Bible really hammers down on idol worship, and we don't have time, but as I grow older and as I continue to read, I really understand why. I used to think that the idol thing was kind of funny because it was like, dude, there's nobody making molten calves in the 21st century in the U.S. where I live. I've never seen a calf like that. Like that's so goofy. It's so much worse than just it goes so much deeper. Justin, if you get on another tangent, bro, I'm going to unplug the computer. Given the nature of what we've discussed in what Deuteronomy is, like, remember we were talking about it's a book of remembrance? Chapter 7 goes into more detail about just exactly who has been currently living in the land that will be possessed by the Israelites. You'll see names such as the Hittites, the Girgashites, and the Amorites among them, well, among others, and there are a lot others, are currently inhabiting the land. An important passage here to note as well, that may not be particularly relevant to this specific section, but I felt was worth mentioning, is chapter 7, verses 6 through 9. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because ye were more in number than any people, for ye were the fewest of all people. But because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he hath sworn unto your fathers, hath the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen, from the hand of Pharaoh the king of Egypt. Know therefore, I went back and read. Keep going. Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. I could keep reading, and I could probably reread it so that it could all flow a little bit better, but for time's sake, we said it again, we'll keep this point to these verses. This passage is incredibly important here to understand here. Israel isn't chosen by God because they're some great people, but because they're weak on their own. And what weakness they have is made strength through the love that God himself chooses to give them, based on his decision, not on what they do without him. Anyway, returning to later sections in this book, we'll see in chapters 12, I think we're in Deuteronomy. Yeah, I think so. I think we're still in Deuteronomy. See in chapter 12, 29 through 31, that God reminds Israel again to not do as the neighbors do in worshiping other gods. For these neighbors not only go against God in their behaviors and practices by serving false gods, but, quote, even their sons and daughters have burnt in fire to their gods, not so subtly hinting that child sacrifice was a common practice of ancient Canaanite religions. Like, dude, how long are we in? Oh my goodness, I think we're like 30 or 40 in. Are you starting to see now that it is not only difficult to understand, but fundamentally dishonest to just make blanket statements about what the Old Testament is describing to us about God and his people without reading all of it? Like, this is why it's so important in the Christian walk to continually go back and reread the scriptures that you've probably heard your entire life, Go back and reread them as often as you can, because there's no way that you're going to get to a point where you've got the entire thing memorized. And if you do, you should be in the Guinness World Record. I don't know, you should get a prize. But if you really have it all memorized, you've already won so much more than you think you have. Everything in the Bible builds upon itself, and while it's easier to say something like, oh dude, you gotta be prepared for any question somebody gets you gotta win the debate, you gotta get them, it's like, sure, I guess, but the real importance to me of being familiar with all of Scripture is for when you yourself start questioning things. And that was another tangent, but that one was important, I don't care. Now, to conclude this section, understand that most people at a pulpit will probably dig really deep into the angles of, look at these barbarians killing children for false gods. Of course they're the bad guys. And I'm tempted to do the same. I'm very human, and I'm tempted to do the exact same thing. But don't forget about what the real point of what God is trying to do. What's God really trying to do here, guys? Israel wants to follow God. God don't kill babies. Israel wants to be set apart, and much of pagan religions during this time are polytheistic, meaning that they serve multiple gods. Doing likewise does not line up with Israel or God's desire for them and their future. God makes it clear that life is found in the blood, so participating in practices that require cutting yourself or drinking blood for different rituals is counter to what both parties want at this time. We don't have to sit here and judge previous cultures on how they thought the world worked, though there may be plenty of arguments that can be made to do so. The objective view of be like this, don't be like that is clearly represented throughout Israel's time in the wilderness before getting to the Promised Land. there's a lot we can learn from archaeology and ancient texts in like secular stuff too, not just biblical stuff. There's a lot we can learn from archaeology and ancient texts about the world Israel lived in at this time. But for now, I want to stay with what the Bible itself says, because it already gives us more than enough to chew on as we go into the next book. But, dude, just know I almost don't do it. Please don't do it. Alright, I won't name them. I did do other research that was cut from this script. And maybe we can talk about it some other time. How about that? Is that okay, Justin? Can I say it like that without having to name the sources? Because I didn't want to give you a hint and then not follow through, but I don't know. If you want to read them, just reach out and I'll tell you what I read, and then we can talk about it, okay? How about that? Does that sound fine? Does that sound good? Because I did read them, and they were long, and they took like 2 days to get through everything I was looking through, but Justin, stop talking, bro. Essentially, God wanted Israel to be set apart from the Canaanites, not because Israel was better, but because Israel wanted to live near God. And the culture already occupying the land was built around practices that moved in the opposite direction. Be that of blood rituals, exploitative power, or, gods that demanded death rather than life. The Bible presents this not as a story of moral superiority, but of incompatibility. You can't build a future centered on God, who defines life as sacred, while absorbing a culture structured around ritual death. With that context in mind, we can now step into Judges and see what happens when Israel doesn't fully do what they were warned would matter. When the book of Judges opens, we see that Israel is in an interesting state as a nation. They're living among their neighbors due to their disobedience to God's specific directions, removing all surrounding nations from the promised land before settling into it. And as a result, they're surrounded by other people with other gods and other systems and other ways of surviving. God wants them to be set apart from these neighboring nations. We've been saying that like 800 times throughout this whole episode. They want Him as the main focus. But after they lose Moses and Joshua, they're left to their own devices in terms of deciding to be with God or forget about Him. It's important to remember that, though, or to point out and be distinct and other big words that make you think. Israel isn't yet in a position of specifically rejecting God per se. But there's this cycle they begin to fall into that serves, in my opinion, as an interesting parallel to what I understand the overall Christian walk to be in my own life. The cycle we're talking about in this episode is essentially something like this. Israel encounters God. God blesses those that follow Him. Israel follows God. They grow complacent for one reason or another. They turn away from God. They experience hardship. They cry out to God. God delivers them. Repeat. Rinse, repeat, and maybe they rinse too, but it definitely repeats. You can see traces of this as early as Genesis and Exodus, but Judges is where the pattern becomes unmistakable. By this point, Israel isn't wandering anymore. They're settled. Joshua has died. There's no centralized leader or chaperone or intercessor to do the heavy lifting of talking to God for Israel. This is all on them in regards of to decide if they're going to follow Him or forget about Him. Judges ends with a line that tells you all you need to know. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. By the time we reach chapter 10, Israel has already moved through this cycle multiple times. They chase the gods of their neighbors. God allows oppression. Israel repents. A deliverer is raised up. Peace follows until the deliverer dies, and the pattern repeats. Which brings us to Judges 10:16. And they put away the strange gods from among them, and served the Lord, and his soul was grieved for the misery of Israel. Grieved here in the Hebrew is katser, which I think I'm saying right. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. Which implies a deep sorrow, right? Not just a mild disappointment, okay? Pain. We saw the word grieved used last episode in Genesis, referring to God's pain over what man has become. This time, notice that God isn't necessarily disappointed and hurt by man himself, but by the misery Israel has gone through in this cycle we keep referring to. In Judges 10:16, we don't see God being fed up and throwing his hands in the air like these people are and always will be a lost cause. Doesn't do something like that, okay? We see a being that watches a relationship rupture in slow motion. God doesn't say that the rebellion and disobedience is what hurts him here. God doesn't say that their imperfections within themselves and next to those around them make him feel ashamed to be their leader. He says, I see how much this means to you. I see this desire to be close to me. I see how hard you are trying to be like me. And it hurts me to witness how hard a task that really is. That's not the language of a tyrant, or a monster bent on destruction and chaos, or that of a distant ruler who gives orders and then looks away to occupy themselves with something else. That's the expression of someone who's still attached, and someone who wants to see their creation more fulfilled than they currently are. A being that loves, despite the pain that causes them to do so. We could spend an entire episode itself going over each of the judges here in this book, and I kind of really want to, but we won't for time and because it doesn't really make sense to do right now. I want to finish this video off by focusing on the judge who comes right after this verse we just mentioned, Jephthah. In chapter 11, Jephthah is described as a mighty man of valor, one who serves as a military captain in charge of striking back at the current enemy of the Israelites, the Ammonites. He does a great job. He wipes them out and continues the cycle of Israel being blessed as a result of trusting the man that has been put in power to lead them. But don't get too far ahead of yourself here. Turn your eyes to verses 30 and 31. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord, and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Here we see Jephthah not praying, but bargaining with God. He promises something to God that God never asked for, as if God is just one more deity in the neighborhood that needs to be paid off, showcasing again that the influence of Canaanite practices go deeper into Israel's heart than just outward rebellion or disobedience to commands. Jephthah fundamentally doesn't understand who the God of Israel is, and he's the judge that delivers them, and he doesn't even know who God is. When Jephthah succeeds and returns home, the first person that meets him at the doors to give him a warm welcome isn't some random guard. It isn't some servant that he probably doesn't even know the name of, but it's his own daughter. And believing that faithfulness meant keeping his word, Jephthah follows through with the vow that never should have been made. And he does it. Am I really tearing? Yeah, Judges isn't just a history lesson, it's a mirror. It's what happens when the connection between us and God breaks and we keep trying to fix it with cycles, promises, effort, and willpower. Anything and everything that we can do in our own strength except the one thing that we actually need, which is faith in the God who brought us here. And that's why the rest of Scripture isn't about God giving better or stricter rules. It's about God making a deeper way back, healing a heart issue from the inside out. I've done this take 3 times. I've never gotten actually that emotional. Okay, I see you. This all feels so heavy. Being a reader on the outside, thousands of years after these events have taken place. Scratching my head at how a few hundred pages earlier, this was the same God who was raining hail on a desert kingdom and parting seas without breaking a sweat. Yet the generation who lived through that deliverance is on the whole choosing fear of what lies ahead over trusting in the God who never changes. As I come out of this fugue state of judging the people I read about in these ancient texts, I begin to relate and remember the times in my own life where I have done the exact same thing. If this really is, as it'll be stated in later passages, the yesterday, today, and forever God that I claim to serve, how can I sit in spaces of doubt after all that's been promised? How can I read this scripture as often as I try to do and take it as seriously as I tell myself and others around me that I do, and still have any feeling of anxiety left inside? This is why the Bible is such a special book to me. This is why I want to share what I'm reading with you. And this is why I hope you get something out of this. There was a lot of stuff researched even outside of the Bible itself for this episode. I wanted to do that to ensure I wasn't just making claims without reason behind them. And there's even more stuff in the 7 books that we've been discussing today that just couldn't fit into one video, even if the video was like 6 hours long. There's so much to glean, to learn from in there. It's just too much to dissect at one time, and even that, it's too much to digest. Like, if you try to do it all in one go, it's gonna give you a big old headache. You know, we'll do our best here in this series to be honest with what we know about what's being said in the pages themselves. But again, without doing some of the legwork yourself at home, the picture is never going to be as clear to you as it is for even me on this side of the camera. And I don't even think that I've got all of it, or that I get all of it. At least not the entire scope of everything that's within it, you know? I hope you're okay. And I hope that this helps with wherever you find yourself in life in terms of understanding God. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. I love you. See ya.